Okay, you're live, guys. Over to you.
All right. There's always that awkward 2 minutes when everyone's like, "Are we live?
We're live.
Oh,
And we're live,
Hi, world.
everybody. Welcome to the studio. It's so nice to see your faces. I feel like I haven't seen them in, well, it's been a few weeks, hasn't it, since we filmed Jewish at the King's Head Theatre. What an experience. So we are here to talk to Poppy and Saul, the writers of Jewish, to discuss what it's like to work in a creative partnership, creative duos, and also to take a look at how you take a project from page to stage. It's a catchy title, but I think we're going to go into detail about the process, how you guys work. I personally think it's a very different type of working, but you guys may disagree with me. So I'm Zoe, I'm the producer of Jewish. And Poppy, Saul, do you guys like to introduce yourselves? And
I think we should introduce each other. I think I should.
Oh,
okay,
go for it.
Actually, no, that's terrifying. Okay, Poppy's
very Bridget Jones.
Poppy is a wonderful writer, journalist, and all-round superstar. She's also podcast queen. She produces many podcasts, and she has an amazing eye for clarity of story, genre, and has a work ethic that's really intimidating. So, that's Poppy.
That's so nice.
Fantastic.
This is Saul Boyer. He is an absolute creative icon. He's hilarious. As soon as I met Saul, I knew I wanted to work with him because he's very funny and great with character and being able to put jokes on a page. Saul often tries to say, we need a joke a minute. We need to have a laugh. Where's the laughs? And he makes every creative project very fun.
Thanks, Pops.
This is definitely something we're going to touch on later in more detail, I'm sure. So how did you guys start working together? What's the backstory? Where did this relationship start?
This is actually quite hard because I think there were lots of times we crossed paths to begin with. And I think one of the first times we crossed paths was doing a burlesque show at university. So we were both performing in that. I think we'd both written material for it, so we kind of knew each other from instances of writing and performing together. And I think I certainly was drawn to Poppy's style because it was definitely not the prevailing comedy that was going on at university at that time. What was in vogue was very, very clever, very cerebral sketches that dazzled everyone with how brilliant they were verbally and or wacky ideas making you think really differently. And I certainly like really big, broad character comedy, which was so out of fashion. It's unbelievable. I just there's so many auditions. I'd just turn up trying to get my sketch into some sort of, Footlights review or whatever, and it would just fall flat on its face. And I'd just see the panel there going, "Thank you so much for your time. That's great. We'll be in touch. We'll contact you. Don't worry." So and I felt kind of in some ways a bit of a kindred spirit with Pops because she was into the slightly more alternative kind of scene. Yes. And I think we bonded over that. And that was the kind of very, very first meeting. And then I guess what happened after that, Pops?
Well, I think the important next thing was there was a competition at university to write an hour-long play, and we thought that it'd be good to write it together because it's a lot of pages. You have to write 50 to 100 pages, and so it's good to work as a team. We had quite a short deadline. We didn't, we'd missed that there was a deadline to it, so we sort of did it over 3 or 4 days. And we both liked the creative challenge. It had a certain level of parameters. It had to be an hour. It had to be under 6 characters. So we sort of got in a room and started writing. And that is how it all began. And that play was called Broken Glass.
And actually, what had immediately preceded that is we'd written a sketch together about Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII's sex life, which was a bit...
It's pretty out there, pretty zany. But after we'd written something that was 2 minutes, it was obviously the real challenge was then to write a whole play.
And also... getting the dramatic arc and the narrative arc was something we wanted to challenge ourselves to do, and it was quite a serious drama actually, but sort of inappropriately funny, I think.
Very black comedy, I would say.
Yeah.
So I suppose the last project you guys have worked on together is Jewish, which is now live online at the King's Head Theatre, plug number one. Going to keep speckling this conversation with more plugs. So what inspired you guys to write Jewish, this rom-com that nobody asked for, which is the tagline?
So I think I work as a journalist in the news, and in fact, one of the sparks, because there were sort of multiple things that came up, was this discussion around the Labour Party and anti-Semitism. And Saul was often sharing experiences of what those discussions were like with friends and family in terms of what it meant definitionally. And that led to a discussion about what it means to be Jewish in Britain, and potentially passing as not Jewish, or people not knowing what your heritage is. And then concurrently, Saul used to also regale me with hilarious stories about being an actor with an agent and the kind of funny things that would come up. So we sort of started almost riffing on this version of Saul, but it was a kind of exaggerated character. And then around the same time, we also were going through our relationships in our 20s and sharing stories of what it's like to have those very heated arguments, all the early young 20s passions. So I feel like all those things fed in to be a kind of zeitgeisty rom-com, partly inspired by elements of Saul's life.
And I think what was really interesting about it was the idea of not fitting into a box or a label, and being in my case being Jewish, but like really kind of in a like left-wing scene, and trying to kind of make sense of that, and also I think in terms of, I don't think we'd seen a lot of, we love rom-com as the rom-com genre, but I'd been watching a lot of old school kind of screwball comedy black and white films from back in the day, and I loved how witty the partners were often in that. You'd have like your Cary Grants, and then you'd have your Catherine Hepburn or whatever, and they just have this sizzling dialogue. Producer, turn off your phone.
It's silent. I don't know. It's linked my bloody.
That should be a fine for that.
I'm so sorry, everyone who's watching.
I lost my flow.
Sorry,
we talked about the old school screwball movies and rom-coms that were also fed into how we took this zeitgeisty story and then gave it a kind of.
Well, I just thought, I just thought there wasn't a hell of a lot of that kind of antagonistic, funny, witty, relationship that had been portrayed in a modern context in rom-coms, and also doing a rom-com for stage felt much more natural to go back to those kind of early progenitors of what rom-coms became, because it is more about the verbal wit and the sparring, and that's what I loved about when we were writing together, because we were naturally doing a lot of that stuff, talking about anecdotes and back and forth, and just putting that down to the page was quite satisfying.
There are quite a lot of ideas that have gone into Jewish, and it's such a it's a 1 hour show filled really to the brim with like a lot of information. There's the rom-com, there's the political side of it. How did you come up with the ideas? How do you come up with a good idea for a show, and how do you whittle it down into the main key things that you want to actually put into the project?
So on the fact about many ideas being in it, I just read this quote from Phoebe Waller-Bridge the other day, which is that there should always be 3 things going on in a scene. And I actually think that's something that we have done, but I didn't really think about in that way. And I do think that the best dialogue is when you're kind of enjoying it in terms of their relationship and the words they're saying, and then there's kind of this other layer perhaps, or something else in the scene that will really keep your attention. I think if you can achieve that, if we have achieved that, I'd be really delighted. In terms of where stories come from, as I say, I think as a writer, it's your duty to be really plugged in and to understand what conversations are going on. Saul and I definitely came out of a generation, or all of us, I should say, a generation where identity was so political and politicized in the papers and the tabloids. So questioning what identifying with your identifiers really means felt like something important to do, but to make it really human and not kind of cerebral, but still really fun. But we were having these discussions, we're having these arguments because everything felt very fraught. Are you a feminist? Are you, what is your gender identity, your racial identity? All of those things suddenly became front page stories. And I think that looking for stories is really about being plugged into the wider global discussion, if possible.
And I often think it sometimes comes from you have the material and then you realize how it speaks to the moment. I think I spent a number of years, probably while writing Jewish, thinking I have to write the zeitgeisty exciting story that everyone's going to love and everything, will be commissioned, it'll be brilliant. But those projects tend to fall by the wayside. In fact, we wrote a different version of Jewish before we got to Jewish, which was much more about Jewish identity and stuff, but it just didn't really fly. It felt like it was straining to be something that it,
Sure. You're right, it's in the subconscious of I
think it's totally about the work coming first. Your first instincts and your first thoughts are relevant to what's happening in general, because we're living through this moment, everyone together. But the way to do that authentically is to actually often build from, the fairly significant moments of your life or the significant things happening to you, and people tend to really instinctively connect with that. But it's a very scary thing to write, and it's often useful to swap the genders of the people that you're writing about, or give them funny accents so no one knows what you're doing. But I think coming from a place of an honesty is very helpful, and people connect to that.
It often seems like plays put the message first and the story second, and often that is quite jarring. So it's quite nice to know that like the story in Jewish is really the thing that you focus on, but behind the story there is all of this subtext, all of these conversations that are going into these characters. It's not so like obvious and like down your throat.
That's it. You don't want to be didactic, but I guess what we haven't said is obviously it's character. Like, character is what you fall in love with and you care about. And we've worked on this project for like 4 years, and that's because I love the characters. I really enjoy people who are complicated and good and bad and messed up but familiar, if possible.
I think what's also terrifying, oh yes, sorry, but just quickly, what's terrifying is that Poppy and I and Zoe, we have this joke that what in Jewish, how do we put it? It was like if it hasn't already happened to us and it's in the play, it's happening to us right now, or it's going to happen to us. It's actually uncanny, the things we wrote into the show, just predicting things that would happen in our future. And I think that's what happens when you write like autobiographically or autobiographical adjacent. You have a bit of something that is plausible. Suddenly you go, this is totally uncanny. And I've got really fun feedback from people saying, it was too close to the bone. I couldn't deal with it. My ex was in the audience. It was awful. So
definitely.
Well, I suppose, we've sort of spoken about the process of taking these ideas, but and putting them into the play and having, iterations of the play. But is there anything like you'd like to speak to about like the actual process once you've got the ideas, once you've got the script or whatever form of the script? What was it like to work on Jewish over these really?
I'm going to answer that question simultaneous to audience question, because I feel like they, have jumped in, and we should. So the question from the audience says, has your favorite moment changed from the first draft to the final draft? And I would say absolutely yes, because I would say that every time you watch it or it has a new iteration, you experience it differently. I think the one that always I come back to is that them ending up on the graveyard together, which I'm trying to, but what happens is, they become equal after there being a power play all the way through, and seeing that equality is satisfying. And when she says she's just a girl standing over a dead grandmother's grave, it's just like, am I ruining the thing? I'm not ruining it, it's fine. But that has changed. And then I've now forgotten your question. Your question was about drafts and redrafting.
What was the process? Because obviously starting this 4 years ago, and it's gone through, we've put on a preview at the Drayton Arms. It went to the Edinburgh Fringe for a month. It's then went to the King's Head. And now it's online. It's had so many iterations. But what is the process like from your side of things, from getting the idea, talking to one another? What's the next step for you guys as writers?
So again, with the prompt for this one was actually that there was a TV writing competition for a new pilot script. So this was originally conceived of as for TV, and Saul and I generally hash out the beats of a show, and then we divide up scenes, and then we come back together and edit scenes. Sometimes we live write together using Google Docs. So that was a kind of first iteration. And then once it became a play, we threw that out and started again, but with the same characters, but really telling a story much more constructed for theatre. And those beats, just the redrafts happened for us quite a few times. We did very different versions, but you kind of have to sometimes get those out of your system. We had a more high stakes version. I think there was a pregnancy. You sort of work out what feels right, and then you get to a version that's what you want it to be. And for example, the therapy gave us a real structure and insight that held it all together, but we came to that quite late, as I recall.
I remember I was invited back to my old school for a drama evening, and it was like all these kind of fairly glitzy actors who had gone and graduated, and they were like doing cool stuff. And it was a monologue evening, and I thought the only way this is going to be really great, useful for me, is if I'm going to write a monologue, that might be to do with the opening of Jewish, present it and see if it works. And everyone else had like Pinter and actual playwrights, material to do. And I had the kind of echo in my head from, doing the National Youth Theatre and other things like that. It's like never perform your own material, because it will always be bad. It'll always be worse than published material. Never do it. And they put me on last as like the final thing. And I was like redrafting it 2 or 3 days before this kind of speech that then we modified into the opening therapy sequence. And I was absolutely bricking it. And I was so nervous. I went on stage and it got such a positive reaction. People were like really laughing, really kind of, I won't say falling off their chairs, but it's a bit much. But like it was a home audience. Like they were supportive, but it was extraordinary. And then my old drama teacher came up and said, "Oh, I never knew you were funny."
Just good to know. As someone who's been trying to be a comedian for a number of years.
I never knew you were such a clown. I was like, oh, great. But it was a great moment, and that I think. And we weren't quite sure about the opening, but then having that experience and that people connected to the material was really great. And I think sometimes it really, with theatre in particular, it's so valuable seeing work performed and seeing the reaction, because it's often so different to what you think is a great idea. And we've done drafts, certainly, that we showed Zoe. She got on board very early in the process, probably too early to feel confident about our skills. And I think there's some drafts she is just like, this is horrendous. What are you doing?
You're right, but a lot of that was table reading, and that actually it's crucial to get actors in a room if you can and hear it, because we instantly can hear if it's wrong. But it's weird when you write it, there's a block there sometimes.
And that's definitely a Phoebe Waller-Bridge thing as well. This is the second reference to Phoebe. But I think, Phoebe. Yeah, are you there? Phoebe Waller. But I think that's quite instructive. I think certainly Poppy and I think have been quite inspired by the way that scripts like Fleabag are able to tread that line between being very, very funny and very poignant, and it kind of allows people to be vulnerable and maybe look at stories that they wouldn't necessarily, or sympathize with people they wouldn't necessarily sympathize with. So we really like playing with that. Anyway, yes.
I suppose, we got Edie on board quite early in the process because we realized that the play was so based on our experiences. I feel like part of me is in the character of TJ, but I think bringing Edie in at a stage when the play was still in a draft, or still in drafting, was quite integral, because she had a lot of impact and influence in the writing and the script. And I think that was quite an interesting choice that we made. And I don't know if that's a normal thing to do, but it felt like the right thing for us to develop the play.
I think sometimes in devised theatre, it is about having people in the room. And as this was a two-hander, as you say, there was an imbalance because you had Saul kind of writing a part for himself, and we needed that other person in the room to kind of be the TJ advocate, I suppose. And to have that at the heart of it. And also, sometimes we had different manifestations of TJ. At one point, she was also Jewish. So, we wanted to work out exactly what casting we were doing in that sense. So I think it maybe is unusual, but I think for this project, it made sense to bring Edie on board.
It's quite organic, really.
And I think it was quite, it was interesting because we cast it, and then we didn't do a big process of devising, but, the character, I think, was a big challenge, and it wasn't necessarily natural for Edie as an actor as well. I think it was quite outside of necessarily what her experience was of, it's a very broad comedy, but we wanted someone who could advocate for the as you're saying, Pops, for the darker side of the character, and she's just absolutely phenomenal with that material. And it's so interesting because she came on board at a time when we were moving away from even the monologues we gave in the audition. As we were auditioning, we were like basically writing that full draft, and it happened at exactly the same time that we'd reconceived the character, modified it, and so probably we were really misleading to all the people we auditioned. But actually, what came through was what our intention was. So it's weird. It lined up. Usually, it's you write the script, it's done, but that aligned perfectly where we were thinking of one thing and we found someone who was able to do that. And Edie's brilliant for
Edie also made it funnier and made stuff funnier and helped us push the comedy side of it. So we're very grateful to her for that.
Thanks, Edie. Shout out to Edie. So I suppose this brings us on to you guys as a partnership. You've spoken a lot about writing together, but what is it actually like being in a creative partnership? It's like a marriage, but how does it work?
So I think it's one of those things that has brilliant sides and hard sides. I mean, I think the good side is you have another person as an editor and as a collaborator, and you can write a page, send it to your creative partner, and you can get instant feedback. And if you have those same tastes, and I trust Saul's judgment, and if he says something's funny or not funny, I'm going to take that seriously. But it also can push you to, if you disagree, like actually articulate why you want something so much. Whereas, when it's just you can decide what happens to that character. But we sometimes, there's proper debates. We say, no, that character wouldn't do that. I really don't like that scene. To take another example, which I'm hoping is not a spoiler, you guys give me evils. There's a restaurant scene. And I think I remember it didn't really work for me on the page, and I didn't really know where Saul was going for it. And he had to really kind of make it funnier, or he had to cut sections because I kept being like, this is too many pages, it's like I can't deal with this. And I think it made one of the best scenes in the play, but it was probably from me not liking it in a way that it got better. And I'm sure there's many examples the other way around. What would you say, Saul?
I think you've articulated it really well. It's what I value about partnerships sometimes is that you have different skills, because I think if you're working with someone with exactly the same skill set, it's really euphoric to begin with, and then you hit a wall where you've built on each other's enthusiasm. Then you hit this wall where neither of you know what to do because you don't have the push and pull. And I think Poppy is in some ways the most different from me collaborator. I love working collaboration because it forcing you to meet deadlines and get things out and be productive. But I think Poppy's perhaps the most thinks in a different way to me, and that has been really, it's like a fast track for the work being good, and it may cause actually sometimes more friction. And we have a good interaction where it's not taken badly. Poppy can be really really forthright, and I think likewise I can get very vociferous, and we can just about struggle through, and often the result is really, it benefits from that tension in a way, creative, different opinions, and I think that is, and certainly for Jewish, I mean, that wasn't an easy write at all. But I think that was the value of it. We learned while we were doing it how to write it on the job.
Yeah, 100%.
So you've kind of mentioned it, but what was the biggest challenge you faced from bringing the idea for the script to the stage? The biggest challenge?
Well, luckily we had Kennedy and Toby, who are fantastic directors, who really, were able to come in again as a force of nature and then take what you've got on the page and add so much to it actually being expressed. And at that point, that's also when Saul has to kind of put his actor hat on and kind of transition into a different role. And I become, anxiety-induced writer because I get to sit in the audience and hear the laughs and hear the commentary, which is a bit like being an artist and standing beside your painting in the Tate or something. I think in the sense that you don't always want to hear the feedback, but it is a very rewarding experience in some ways. But yeah, I think it's really hard. Really getting down what your vision and putting it down on the page and making sure that every scene is working and that you kind of go through the motions that you need to go through. Where is your rising fall action? Because sometimes you write quite intuitively, and then once you start putting it on stage, you realize scenes are just dragging or the rhythm's not right. And so there's still cuts to be made and edits to be made once it's adapted and actually performed. I think that's the hardest thing. And I'm really excited because for me, this King's Head production is the best iteration it's ever been, because it's gone through the Edinburgh run where it's been really, it's had the bits where there was no laughs, and we've been able to edit on the road, and therefore it's sharper.
Yeah, I think that's okay. For me, the biggest challenge is transitioning from a writer to an actor. That is awful. I've written a number of things for myself, and I find there isn't. What's often so great about acting is that you take someone's work and you build on it and you change it. And I think it's very hard in a short space of time to perform your own work and give it the same critical distance that you require. And so that's something that's really tricky. But I think, as we've been discussing, having lots of different versions of the play has allowed those fallow periods for me to change, feel more distant from the work, and then come back to it in this run as a kind of old friend. And I know how to give this a bit more depth or work on certain other aspects that maybe I didn't get a chance to previously. So, and to Poppy's point about editing on the fly, I think when you put it in performance, I'm probably not very naughty actor for doing this, but you realize which bits are significant because you forget the bits that aren't significant, particularly if you're doing it every night. And there's certain bits, and you'll just have like sort of a collective madness where you'll just forget a chunk of a scene and not notice until the director says, hang on, you didn't say X, Y, and Z, Kennedy and Toby giving us notes, and you go, oh my God, we forgot half the scene. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes that's an indication of a bit of irrelevance. So it's quite interesting as a writer to observe that, and it took me a long time to detach from being a writer and not look out of the character and think, oh, did that get a laugh? Do people like that? And just inhabit the character as you would as an actor. So that was my biggest challenge.
So you've mentioned quite a lot about how you've written Jewish from real life and your real life experiences. What is it like actually taking your life, transcribing it into a play, and trying to mask, I suppose, bits that are really awkward and people might recognize themselves? What is that experience like? And to follow that up, once you've answered that, how much of Jewish is based on your own life?
Well, I will give a very short answer because I feel like we stole from Saul's life more than mine. But I would say that when it's something like a character you really care about, like the mom or the grandma, there's a duty that to do them respectfully and to do them in a non-way that you're not laughing at them, but you're like adding comedy and joy to that character. So I feel like that's a burden a bit. I think when you're taking things from your own life, there are little sneaky ways you can disguise it. As Saul said, you can swap the gender, or and amazingly, people never see themselves in negative portrayals. We've had people that very much inspired elements, but just have no idea that it's based on them. So I think that's because people don't see themselves in art in that way. What would you say, Saul?
Well, yeah, we've given away our secret now. People was that me? And that or no, or the other way is that people think it's them.
Yeah.
I had someone who thought it was all about them, and they were really angry, sort of really like weirded out by it. And I was like, that wasn't you at all. So it's quite funny. But I guess so what as I was writing Jewish, my grandma passed away, and I was very close to her. So that was basically a lot of the emotions around that, and how it made me think about relationships as well, because she was one of these people who's really obsessive about marriage in a very sort of old school way. She thought marriage was brilliant, and in fact, I was only recently just I was made the mistake perhaps of looking at old videos of her and things like that, and then she's just like, when are you going to be married? It's just like, it's funny. It's so funny because it's so relentless in real life that you forget. And then actually just a random video is just, or it's all about marriage. And so these things that come out in the art may sometimes feel obvious, but they are, or maybe a simplification of things, but they're often the truth, simply how it is. And I suppose that, so the bits that, doing this performance, I felt there's a scene in the middle which features a eulogy, and doing that felt, because I actually did the eulogies for, actually I've become a go-to eulogy person for elderly relatives when they pass away, because I know I can do it. So that was quite surreal, because I've done lots of eulogies at stone settings and things like that, and funerals. So so that was particularly emotive this time around as well. It was kind of part of the play for me is almost like an act of remembrance and celebration of people who have passed away in my life. And during the first run at the King's Head, I remember there's this day that I was walking in, and it was, I think, the day we had press in, and it was raining. It was, it was awful weather, and sort of for no reason, I just sort of burst into tears as I was walking down, because I really felt like my, I don't know, this sounds mad, but I felt like my grandma was sort of there with me, and she was kind of wishing me luck, and I just lost the plot basically, and I thought, this is going to be a great performance, we're going to do ourselves proud, and that performance was the best we'd ever done it up to that point, and got a really good reception and led to loads of great things for us. So that felt very special, and I think that's an advantage of doing things that mean something to you. It does communicate,
That's a really lovely story. And just, I think we're running out of time, and just to quickly change the tone and guys, it's really beautiful. I'm very sorry to interrupt. It's like lovely, but what is next for Jewish? Wrap this up. Beautiful conversation we've had up.
As you know, you can now watch it on the King's Head website. You can stream it anytime, so it doesn't matter if you're in a different time zone. We've curated it specially for screen, so definitely check it out. But yeah, we would potentially love to take it on tour. We're working on it as a screenplay. We're not done with our characters yet, so watch this space.
Yeah, watch out for TJ and Max.
Coming at you.
Yeah, King's Head Theatre website, get a ticket. They're £10 to £18, and it's an hour-long, amazingly hilarious play written by these two genius people, so it's definitely not one to miss. Thank you all very much for watching.
Thanks, Zoe.
Bye.
Bye.